All right, so since we're rounding off the end of the year here, I sort of had an idea where I guess I'm in a more reflective state at this time of the year. And I was thinking back on some of the videos that I really enjoyed making, and it seemed like some of you really enjoyed watching them. And there's been different themes throughout the year. I kind of make these videos pretty organically for the most part. I have an idea, something that interests me in comics or illustration, an artist that I want to look at and share with all of you. And then sometimes because of that, I kind of go down a certain rabbit hole because maybe it seemed to interest me more than I thought it would. A particular artist might have led me to think about another particular artist, or some of your guys' feedback in the comments got me thinking about a different type of video. It all kind of happens pretty organically. And one of the things that sort of caught on this year in terms of videos was like these penciled comic videos. I had some of these comics from my old collection that I started going through on the channel. And then based on your guys' reaction and some of your guys' suggestions, I went out and got some other ones as well. And it's just been really fun over the last year or so to really look at some great artists and look at them in like a real bare bones kind of way, without the inks, without the colors, without any of the special effects. Just look at the storytelling in that pure penciling stage. And every artist does it differently. Some do it really detailed, some are much more loose and rough. But as far as like superhero mainstream comics is concerned, it's really the penciler, if there really is such a thing anymore. That's, I guess, in some ways a dying art, just a strict penciler. But the penciler, traditionally at least, has always kind of been the style of the book, the person that has really like set the tone and the overall feel and look of that particular comic. So it's been really great just to isolate it and look at the penciling. And in this past year, we've looked at some really great pencilers. And I had this idea to kind of like make a little bit of a compilation, sort of like the best of, greatest hits of some of these penciling videos. So in this video, I wanted to take 3 artists that we looked at as far as just their penciling work was concerned, and kind of show highlights from those particular videos, just so that if you haven't watched those full videos yet, you could get a little bit of a taste of what we were talking about this past year and kind of just get like a condensed look at some of their penciled work. So in this video, those 3 artists are going to be Ron Garney, Alan Davis, and Jim Lee. 3 top-notch comic book pencilers, so much to learn from all 3 of them, and all 3 of them have a very different, unique way of going about penciling comics. Looking at their pencils, for me, I really learned a lot. I hope you guys did as well. And if you haven't seen these videos, this is a really great way to kind of like introduce yourself to not only those videos, but also their work if you're unfamiliar with their work, which I'm sure the vast majority of people watching this video aren't unfamiliar with these 3 artists' work. But you may be unfamiliar with seeing just their penciled art. And that's sort of the beauty of these comics that we're looking at in these videos, because even the biggest fans of, say, Jim Lee, for instance, might not have ever seen a full comic of his penciled work. And I know for someone who grew up wanting to be a comic book penciler specifically, this kind of stuff is very valuable to anyone who wants to make comics on any kind of level, because it just shows you the craft and the skill that goes into making these things. So without further ado, I really just want to jump into this video and get started on the first artist we're going to look at, which is Ron Garney. In this original Ron Garney penciled video, we looked at how his penciled work compared to the final finished comic that got printed. This was a Captain America comic, probably from like the mid to late 90s. In the clips that I put together from this video, we also talk about some of the classic Silver Age fundamentals that show through in his work, and how he kind of brought them up to a more like modern look and just added his own unique flair. Ron Garney is one of my favorite superhero artists, and this particular Captain America run was my favorite growing up. But anyway, I'm going to stop talking. Let's look at some Ron Garney penciled comic art. When you open it up, this is page 2 and 3, double page spread. But now let's take a look at the penciled version of that double page spread. Look how cool that is. Awesome. And you can see here that he suggested where and sort of how the title sequence was going to be laid out. He didn't just leave that empty for the design team to put together. He was kind of suggesting some of that in his pencils there. And then, of course, the letterer and the designer built upon that idea. And if you get close here, you can see the underdrawing, the eraser marks, just some really great use of the pencil here. I always thought Ron Garney's art was so structurally sound. Like he drew strong figures, technical details in a way that felt solid and finished, but it was never like over labored. And then, of course, a young me was trying to figure out how the inker would take cues from certain parts of the pencils, where like certain areas like this, of course, in the pencils, you could see underneath the pencils. And then I was fascinated at how the inker would just black all that out. It started to give me ideas about inking my own work. And then even how like the coloring would put a color hold over some of the lines here with the fire. So every pass each artist takes on these pages is hopefully making it better and better. And I think this comic is a real great example of when that all goes right. Because of the nature of pencils, when you're penciling, there's much more of a varied sort of level of grays and nuanced lines and sketchy lines. You could see here that it looks like Ron's using like the side of the pencil to indicate some of the black areas. So when you look at the penciled version of, say, like a panel like this, it looks very intricate and detailed because of course it is. But then when it gets inked and colored, everything kind of gets simplified and much clearer, as it should. But underneath these seemingly simple looking panels, when you see the penciled work, you see how much thinking and how much work really goes into it. All the perspective, all the design work of some of these, spaces that he's creating. It's very Jack Kirby in many ways. Some of these mechanical lines here, even these two figures, seems very, very Jack Kirby to me. I mean, this page right here is almost literally taking a page out of How to Draw Comics the Marvel Way, when they're showing you how to create dynamic Marvel storytelling. This is sort of like a masterclass in that. Check out this 246 panel grid where he's just putting the perspective here on an angle. The panel work flows really great. All the shots are tilted just slightly. The camera is always moving. And it's really cool to see the comparison side by side of the penciled version and the final version. I've said this before with other artists, and Ron Garney is definitely no exception, but when you see work like this, the artist just makes it look easy and effortless. The storytelling is so clear. It sort of comes to life on the page. It really makes it look like he wasn't laboring over this stuff. And I think that's the mark of a really great artist. All right, the next up is Alan Davis. I think the genius and brilliance of Alan Davis's work really is a combination of his draftsmanship and his sense of design. And in this clip that we're going to look at from a larger video that I did earlier this year, we're going to take a look at his penciled Fantastic Four work. And we're going to see where that draftsmanship and design really shows itself in his penciled art. We also talk a little bit about perhaps Alan Davis's temperament and personality showing through in the art. It's all one big hypothesis and guess on my part. And then in this little highlight here, we also talk about the difference between penciling and inking, and how it really takes a great inker, such as Mark Farmer, Alan Davis's longtime inker, to really be able to capture a great penciler's work and not only translate it to a printed comic, but enhance it and kind of understand the original intentions of that artist in the pencils. So without further ado, let's look at some Alan Davis pencils. Look at that face. That's just a really well-drawn face. Alan Davis has what all the great comic artists have, which is a very strong draftsmanship. I mean, you look at a face like that, it has all the lighting, all the accurate anatomy, differentiation between different textures like the hair, the skin, his costume. So you have all the beautiful draftsmanship that any great illustrator would have. Plus, you have a really great sense of design as well. He's doing some of his own sound effects, lettering here. The page design itself is really, really well thought out and dynamic. I mean, this isn't a double page spread, but look at how these two pages independently look next to each other. That is something that a good comic artist thinks about from both a storytelling and design aspect, which is how these pages are going to look next to each other, whether they connect to make one full image or not. So he has the draftsmanship, he has the design, and then he just has a really great sense of storytelling as well. He's the director of this movie and the cinematographer as well. So there are plenty of artists that can draw really nice faces and maybe do portraiture and all that kind of stuff, but not every artist can do that in addition to all the other things that come with creating a comic. It's one of the reasons why I love comic art so much, because it encompasses so many different areas of art making, and it packages it all together into this thing called a comic book. And for me, whether or not I'm interested in the characters or the story itself, that's almost secondary or even further down the list, to be honest. To me, it's just a beautiful art form that I really just get a kick out of looking at. And ever since I was a kid, it has inspired me to want to make my own. And that quest that starts from a purely visual kind of inspiration really starts to evolve into something more than that, which is to also want to tell a story with these pictures that I draw. Looking at Alan Davis's work reminds me of something that I think about quite a bit when I look at different artists' work, which is that based upon the lines that they put down and the way they render things and the consistency at which they draw their comics, and by that I mean the consistency of style and care and attention to detail throughout the comic. It reminds me that when I look at stuff like this, I kind of get an indication, and I don't know if I'm right or wrong in this, but it seems to indicate the artist's like temperament. I feel like there's almost an insight as to what their personality might be like, just in terms of the lines that they put down and the way they draw. There's a real, methodical way that it seems Alan Davis draws, and just a real level of focus at which he draws with. And to me, that indicates someone who is very patient, perhaps, in their drawing process, and also very focused and present when they are drawing. This doesn't look like someone who is all that distracted. It also looks like someone who gets great pleasure out of drawing. Drawing the thing and all the little rock formations, but then also just drawing all these very soft and idyllic backgrounds back here as well. They're all drawn with the same level of care and detail, and it doesn't feel like it's rushed through. It doesn't feel like it's drawn kinetically or with a heavy hand. I mean, just in a panel like this, the superhero stuff is really an afterthought. This is really just a beautiful illustration of like a hummingbird and plant life and nature. You have to really love to draw to be able to draw at this level. It's apparent, I would assume, that he really does love to draw superheroes and he is inspired by that stuff. But it seems that he's also just an artist first. And that really just shows through in the artwork. And like I said, there's something about perhaps his temperament that probably shows through in the work itself. I could also be completely wrong in that theory. Maybe he's just frantically drawing all of these pages and breaking pencil leads as he goes. But there's something about different mark making that I think is sometimes almost like handwriting in a way, an indication of that particular artist's temperament and just overall personality, perhaps. Pencils are very like forgiving in their own way. They have a certain kind of range that obviously inks don't have. There's a nuance to pencils, And so much of the appeal of this penciled work is that nuance, those gradients that sort of happen, the blending that happens naturally when you just start to render and shade with pencil. But then when you're an inker, you're thinking in strictly black and white. There actually is no nuance. And so it's up to you to use all different techniques to interpret some of that nuance that is in the pencils, and to interpret it in a way that is just black and white, that is going to print well, read clearly, and look good when there's colors on top of it. So it's a real tall order, but Mark Farmer is one of the best in the business. So if anyone can do it, he can. Man, I love those Alan Davis pencils. That was a suggestion from some of you in one of my other penciling videos in the comments, and I sought that book out and was super impressed by it. So much to learn in his stuff. Speaking of so much to learn, let's continue learning with another great master of comic book penciling, Jim Lee. Jim Lee, another one of my favorites growing up. I had a lot of fun looking at his penciled Superman comic. And in this little highlight reel from that particular video, we're going to talk about Jim Lee's process, how he kind of just dives right into the page without any real like thumbnails or layouts. He kind of does all of his thumbnailing and layout at full size on the 11x17 board. At least that's what I have seen him do on his Twitch streams. On those streams, he's also made it very clear that he's not afraid to erase. One of the big like revelations, I think, for a lot of us watching, which is that an artist at his level and caliber is erasing quite a bit until he feels like he gets something right. And he has the artistic confidence enough to know that even if he erases something that looks good but isn't right, he could redraw it again and make it even better. It's really cool to notice certain things too when he's working on these streams, which is that he doesn't lay down like traditional perspective grids. We'll talk about that in this video as well. Also, in this little highlight here, we're going to talk a little bit about how he does everything on the final penciled board. He doesn't leave anything for like special effects at the end in post-production. So let's take a look at this highlight from my Jim Lee penciled Superman comic video. I mentioned this before in another Jim Lee video, but I've watched him live stream his comic book making process like in real time. He used to, I'm not sure if he does anymore, he used to stream a lot on Twitch, and I never was into Twitch, but I used to watch them afterwards when they would get posted to YouTube. And those are still up on YouTube. And man, for anyone who is a Jim Lee fan, or maybe not even a Jim Lee fan, and just wants to understand how mainstream modern day comics are drawn, but traditionally like on paper with pencil, just watch that. They're like 6-hour videos, and from literally start to finish, he will finish a page in real time while he's, you know, chatting with the chat room there, taking questions and all that. And I was a, you know, hardcore Jim Lee fan growing up, and if I had any kind of access to that sort of thing when I was younger, man, that would just have been like a dream come true. I grew up in a time before all that kind of technology, so I was really just trying to piece together in a lot of ways through books and magazines how these guys would go about making these kinds of comics and getting these kinds of details with just a pencil or just a pen or just a brush. And so I would look at these like little examples that I would find of a penciled page somewhere in a book or a magazine, and I would just stare at it and try to read the interviews and understand what kind of tools they were using. But to watch that in real time it's pretty incredible, and it's a really, really great resource. And it's something that I watch regularly myself, just to remind myself, like, even though I'm not, you know, really like a technical, detailed, tight penciler like a Jim Lee, it's just to see how, you know, a master, someone who's been doing it as long as he has, and whether you like this kind of style or not, he has mastered it, and in many ways kind of set the tone for what a lot of these modern comics would look like. there's still so much I could learn, and I think anyone else could learn by just watching someone like that work. And one of the things that's really fascinating about watching him work is that I've mentioned this before, but it seems as though he doesn't go into pages after doing a series of thumbnails and layouts. He just goes straight onto the board and roughs it out page by page that way. So a sort of, I guess, more conventional method is that an artist would read the script if they're working with a writer, and then they would do a series of small little versions of those pages, sketches of what those pages are going to look like. You could call them thumbnails, you could call them layouts, but they're just doodles and shorthands for how many panels are going to be there, roughly what the composition of the panel is going to be, all that kind of stuff. But Jim Lee seems to skip that stage, and he just goes right onto the 11 by 17 artboard and just starts roughing in the page in like stick figure, very bubbly, cartoony gestures first. And he'll do revision after revision, just erasing, reworking it, erasing, reworking it, until he feels like there's a good balance of the page. And then once he has the whole page, again, in real size, 11 by 17, roughed out, then he just goes in at the top of the left-hand corner of the page and starts detailing and works his way down, it's pretty incredible to watch. And I suppose over the years he's adopted that because it just takes one stage out of the process out. And when you're a monthly artist and when you've been doing it as long as he's been doing it, I guess you learn to become very efficient with your time and your process. And anything that feels like you don't really need to do it, and it's just adding an extra amount of time, it's probably worth removing from the process. I've said this many times before, but comic art is a very, very practical art form. And in many ways, the style and the function of it is dictated by the deadlines and the amount of time that you have to work on it. So I think sometimes the more precious you get with it and the more, I guess, for lack of a better word, artistic your process becomes, that could just add a lot of time to your process. And if you're on a tight deadline, like a monthly superhero comic book, it could add unnecessary amounts of time to it. So again, Jim Lee, having done this as long as he's done it, has probably figured out what works and what doesn't in terms of giving him the best results in the right amount of time. One of the other things that I've heard him say while he's drawing on those live streams is that he doesn't really do like perspective grids anymore. He just kind of knows how to do it right onto the board. And it's pretty incredible to watch him do that stuff with a ruler. Like there's no vanishing point, and he just kind of, he knows where the vanishing point is in his mind, but he doesn't grid stuff out. He just kind of puts the ruler down and moves it around, and he's moving it while like the pencil is on the page. It's really very interesting to watch. He uses the ruler like it's a tool that's kind of like guiding his pencil. Pretty incredible. Like these little buildings in the back, the way he'll do that. I mean, he could spend, maybe a minute and a half just drawing that real simple skyline back there, and it's so descriptive. It's Metropolis, it's the Daily Planet, and he's able to do that almost with his eyes closed. It's pretty incredible. And then something like this that's a lot more elaborate, although it looks incredibly detailed, and it's a pretty basic one-point perspective. And for somebody like him who's been doing this for as long as he's been doing it, this is something that he can do relatively easily. There's an interesting thing going on in this panel where I think in the final printed version, it seems like, I think this is Lois Lane, she's looking at some sort of like hologram thing that's in front of her. I think these are like different like news items in these different boxes here, and they're sort of holograms floating in front of her. And if I were to look at that final comic, I would assume that that was done strictly in post-production, like all those little holographic lines. But it seems like he's just doing that with pencil right on the actual board. Sometimes the old school guys, when they're working traditionally, they'll even do stuff like that on a sheet of like vellum paper. and then deliver that with the artwork. And then again, post-production will piece those separations together, but he's just doing it right onto the final art, which is really interesting. I guess the colorist would then probably select those lines and work their magic with it. But that's really interesting to see that he just goes right onto the Bristol board itself. There's more of that over here. And again, if it takes too much time to do this on a separate sheet of tracing paper or to put it into the computer and try to mess around with it, and if you're as sort of precise with the penciling as he is and you can just do it right there, why not? I think sometimes we've gotten a little bit too carried away with all of our fancy technology to think that these are things that we have to do with a computer. But for consistency's sake and for more of a, I guess, holistic approach to the artwork, it's really nice to see that he just does it right onto the paper itself. Here's more of that. All right, well, I hope this was a fun little look at 3 different artists and their different approaches to penciling a comic book page. We looked at Ron Garney, Alan Davis, and Jim Lee. I'd say those are 3 pretty great artists to look at and study from. Like I mentioned, these were sort of just highlights and compilations of larger videos that I had put out throughout this past year. I actually made a playlist for my channel that collects all of my penciled art videos. So if you want to watch the full videos of the Ron Garney, Alan Davis, or Jim Lee video that were featured here, check out that playlist. I'll leave a link for it in the description somewhere. Also, since we looked at so many different artists this past year in terms of their penciling work, and you want to see me do a part 2 of a video like this, where we look at a few more comic artists' penciled work in a compilation video like this, let me know in the comments below. Also, looking into the future, I do want to do more of these videos where I look at a particular artist's penciled comic. There's rough cut comics, there's unwrapped comics, there's all these different versions of penciled comics that different publishers put out. I did get a lot of suggestions for Joe Mad's Ultimates. There's an issue where they released just the pencils for that issue, so I've been trying to hunt that one down on eBay, trying to find the right price for it. So stay tuned and stay patient for that. I have some Steve Rude penciled work that we'll definitely be looking at, some J. Scott Campbell penciled work, so there's stuff to come for sure. This is definitely not a topic that I want to leave. Like I said, I think there's a lot to learn from looking at artists' penciled work, whether you just want to be a penciler or you want to be a more well-rounded penciler, inker, doesn't matter. There's so much to learn from watching just that one particular stage in the process. Also, before you go, make sure you check out my Patreon. On my Patreon, I'm posting a bunch of stuff that I don't post anywhere else. A comic I'm working on. I have plans to be working on another little short comic story coming up. All of that stuff will be posted only on Patreon. I have process videos. I have early access to these videos. I have extended versions of these YouTube videos, Q&As, all that kind of stuff. So hopefully there's a tier that works for you. I'm having fun over there, and I hope to see you over there sometime soon. I'll leave the link in the description if you want to sign up. And that's all I got for this video. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll catch you in the next one. Take care.